Hey, get your hands off that panel. You're maintenance, not management.
The words cut across the marble lobby just as the executive elevators chimed, polished doors sliding open like they were embarrassed for him. A woman in a tailored blazer didn't even look twice when she said it, already turning back to her reflection in the glass. Security shifted closer. Phones paused mid-scroll. The building hummed, bright and confident, unaware it was about to choke on its own power. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. What none of them noticed was how the man in the gray uniform tilted his head, listening. Not to her, to the building, to the faint vibration traveling through the floor, the offbeat whine buried under the normal rhythm of a working tower. He rested his palm against the wall, calm as if he'd been invited instead of warned away. Something wasn't right. And deep down, he knew exactly how bad it could get. He stepped back, without argument, tools hanging quietly at his side. No apology, no explanation, just patience, the kind that comes from having survived things far louder than a corporate lobby. He was a single dad before he was anything else. Everything he did bent toward one fixed point: getting home on time, making sure the medicine stayed cold, counting breaths at night until a small chest rose easy instead of tight. That reality weighed more than any insult. Pride didn't pay for inhalers. Overtime did. The woman who dismissed him, Miranda Vale, walked straight into the executive elevator, heels clicking, already mid-call about investors and optics. CEO, power in human form. The doors closed on her certainty. He turned toward the service corridor, badge swiping green. The hallway narrowed, light flattening from luxury glow to practical white. This was where he belonged in their eyes, where power never looked. The hum grew louder here, less polished, honest. He paused at a maintenance panel halfway down, fingers hovering. The reading flickered just for a second. Too fast for most to notice, too precise to ignore. He logged it anyway, sending the report up the chain he knew wouldn't read it. Still, procedure mattered. Order mattered. He'd learned that a long time ago. The service elevator rattled as it descended. Inside, the mirror was scratched, dull. He barely recognized the man staring back. Older than he felt, shoulders held straight out of habit, eyes alert even when tired. A photo was taped inside his locker upstairs, a crooked smile, gap-toothed, holding a paper crown from school. That smile powered every step he took. Up above, the building flexed under a growing load. Lights shimmered like heat over asphalt. On the 42nd floor, a restricted guest suite prepared for an event add-on. Childcare for visiting executives who liked to pretend balance could be scheduled. Air systems pushed harder, compensating, straining. In the control room, alerts stacked quietly. Nothing red yet. Nothing worth stopping a billion-dollar presentation. He stepped off the elevator into another service hall, boots echoing soft against concrete. A junior tech nodded, distracted. "Long night," the kid muttered. "Always is," he replied, eyes already on the vents, warm, too warm. Somewhere above, Miranda Vale smiled for investors, talking about efficiency, about resilience. Words polished smooth. She believed systems worked because people like him stayed invisible. The hum deepened. Not loud, dangerous things rarely are at first. He reached for his radio, thumb resting there, waiting, not panicked, ready. If it tripped, he'd be there. If it didn't, he'd still finish his route, catch the late bus, tuck his kid in, count breaths until morning. The building made its choice without asking permission. Lights flickered again, longer this time. A murmur rippled through the upper floors. Somewhere, a child coughed, sharp and dry, air thinning, where it shouldn't. He closed his eyes for half a second, already mapping what lay behind walls no executive had ever seen. Then he moved, pace steady, toward the heart of the system that was about to expose everything they thought they knew about who mattered. The night had only just begun. He moved with purpose now, boots striking concrete as alarms began to whisper instead of scream. The corridor lights dimmed a shade, then steadied, like the building was trying to convince itself everything was fine. He knew better. The vibration he'd felt earlier had sharpened, focused, traveling through steel ribs and ductwork with intent. A radio crackled near the control junction. "We've got a minor fluctuation on 42, a voice said, casual, bored. "Probably load balancing." He thumbed his own radio. "It's not balancing," he said quietly. "It's choking." Static answered, then a pause. "Copy. Maintenance. Log it." Maintenance. Always maintenance. He crouched beside an access grate, palm flat against the metal. Hot. Too hot for this hour, this load. His jaw tightened. Somewhere above, filtered air was failing someone who didn't have the luxury of time. The thought pressed harder than the heat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded note, creased from being checked too often. Medication schedule. Dosage times circled in pen. He checked his watch automatically, then folded the paper again, precise. Being late wasn't an option. Neither was letting this go. Footsteps echoed behind him. The junior tech from earlier slowed, uncertainty written all over his face. "They say don't touch anything unless it goes red." "It won't go red in time," he replied, already removing the panel screws. "It'll go quiet first." The kid swallowed. "If Vale finds out, she will," he said, "eventually." Inside the panel, readings spiked and dipped like a nervous pulse. He adjusted a valve manually, just enough to buy seconds. The building exhaled, a low groan traveling upward. Somewhere, coughing eased, then returned. Above them, applause rolled across the executive floor. Glasses clinked. A speech crescendoed. "Look," the kid whispered, eyes wide. "You sure about this?" He met the kid's gaze, steady. "I'm sure about what happens if we don't." Another alarm chirped, sharper now. Red blinked once, then vanished. Systems suppressing symptoms instead of solving problems. He hated designs like that. Pretty on the surface, rotten underneath. He straightened, wiping his hands on his uniform. "I need access to the main air handler, now." "That's restricted." "So is suffocating," he said, already moving. As they hurried, the building lurched. Not physically, but in sound. Fans surged, pipes rattled. The smell of overheated insulation crept in, faint but unmistakable. He increased his pace, mind racing through layouts he hadn't officially been trained on. At least, not here. They reached a locked door. The kid hesitated, then swiped his badge. Red light. He tried again, same result. "Out of my way," a woman snapped behind them. Miranda Vale stood there, phone in hand, irritation flashing across her face as she took in the scene. "What is this? Why are you two clogging a restricted corridor?" He turned slowly. "Air's failing on 42. We need access." She laughed once, sharp. "Facilities doesn't need anything during my event. Call engineering. This is above your pay grade." He didn't raise his voice. "Engineering's watching dashboards. I'm listening to the building." Her smile vanished. "You don't get paid to listen. You get paid to follow procedure." The lights flickered again, longer. Somewhere above, a child cried, thin and panicked, sound carrying through vents like an accusation. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. Just a crack. He stepped closer to the door, eyes never leaving it. "Every second you argue," he said, "someone up there's breathing less." Silence stretched. Phones came up. Someone was filming. If you're still with me, subscribe now, because what happens next flips everything they believed about power. Miranda's jaw tightened. She glanced at the blinking panel, at the watching staff, then back at him. "You touch one thing without authorization," she said, "and you're done." He nodded once, then opened the door. Another alarm shrilled. Unmistakable this time. Red stayed red. She swiped her badge. Green. The door swung open, releasing a wave of hot air that told him he was already almost too late. He moved through without a word, tools in hand, the sound of the door closing behind them echoing like a countdown. Inside, the air handler thundered, overworked and furious, lights strobing warnings no one upstairs had ever learned to read. He took it all in at a glance, shoulders squaring, focus narrowing until the world became levers, timing, and consequences. The kid hovered nearby, frozen between fear and awe. Miranda stood just outside, phone lowered now, power suddenly useless. He rolled his shoulders, inhaled the burning air, and reached for the first manual override, knowing this was only the beginning, knowing the building would demand more before it forgave them. Somewhere deep within the ducts, pressure shifted again, and he prepared himself for the fight the tower was about to offer. Tonight. Heat slammed into him as the handler roared, vibration crawling up his arms. He twisted the first override a quarter turn, not more, listening for pitch instead of watching lights. The machine answered with a strained whine, then settled a hair. He glanced at the pressure gauge, already climbing again. "Don't," Miranda started. "Wait," he said, palm raised, eyes never leaving the intake. "It's breathing wrong." The kid swallowed hard. "Engineering's on their way. They'll be late," he said. "They always are when graphs look fine." He slid a panel aside and exposed the manual dampers, fingers moving with practiced certainty. Years ago, in another life, he'd learned how systems lied under stress, how redundancy failed in patterns. He adjusted 2 vanes in sequence, counting silently. The handler shuddered, then the alarms dipped. Relief rippled through the ducts. "No," he said when Miranda exhaled. "We're borrowing time." A new alarm cut in, sharper, coming from the secondary return. He followed the sound, boots clanging on the grated floor. The smell of hot dust thickened, making his throat itch. He imagined small lungs tightening and pushed faster. The kid jogged to keep up. "Security's asking if we should clear the floor." "Clear the vents first," he said. "Evacuation without air makes panic worse." Miranda bristled. "You don't get to decide that." He stopped and finally looked at her. "I get to decide whether this machine tears itself apart." Beyond the glass, silhouettes pressed close. He felt the familiar pressure of being judged by people who didn't know the cost of mistakes. He turned back to the machine and knelt, removing a wrench from his belt. The metal was warm, reassuring. He cracked the secondary valve and bled pressure slowly. The handler responded, fans easing, ducts sighing like a held breath released. The alarms softened to warnings. A voice crackled over the radio. "Control to Vale. We're seeing improvements. What did you authorize?" She hesitated. "Temporary manual adjustments." "By who?" Her gaze flicked to him, then away. "Facilities." He heard the word land like a dismissal. It didn't matter. The gauge steadied. For the moment, the child upstairs would breathe. He shook his head when the kid whispered thanks. "Don't thank me yet." The lights flickered again, this time across the entire bay. He stiffened. "That's power," Electrical's a different department, Miranda said. It's the same problem, he replied, loads cascading. The handler surged, alarm spiking. He lunged for the cutoff, then stopped himself, teeth clenched. Killing airflow would be catastrophic. He needed another path. Open the auxiliary intake, he said. That requires executive authorization, Miranda snapped. He met her eyes. Then authorize it. She faltered, torn between policy and the watching crowd. The radio squawked with overlapping voices. Somewhere above, applause turned to confusion. Do it, she said finally. He spun the wheel. Cold air rushed in, shocking the system. The handler bucked, then found balance. Alarms died down to a single amber pulse. He leaned back against the rail, breath heavy, sweat cooling on his neck. Then a different alarm began to howl, distant but unmistakable. He straightened, dread settling in his gut. That's electrical, the kid said. He nodded. And it's coming here. Miranda's face drained of color. Can you fix that too? He looked at the maze of conduits overhead, already humming with dangerous intent. Not alone, he said, and not if they keep pretending titles matter more than timing. Engineers burst in, confusion flashing to alarm as readings scrolled. Who made these changes? One demanded. He wiped his hands and stepped forward. I did, to keep someone breathing. You could have caused a cascade failure. It's already happening, he said calmly. I slowed it. The lights dimmed again, deeper. The floor vibrated, a low growl rolling through the bones of the building. From somewhere far above came a scream, sharp with fear. He closed his eyes for half a second, calculating. There was one option left, ugly and risky, the kind no policy covered. He opened them and spoke, voice steady. Listen to me. If we don't reroute power through the service spine right now, the tower goes. Dark, and when it does, people get hurt. Silence fell. Miranda stared at him, seeing not a uniform but a threat to her certainty. Prove it, she said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn keychain, metal etched with an old insignia, edges smoothed by years of use. He held it up, not as a badge of authority, but as a promise of competence. I can, he said, but only if you let me. The building groaned, lights flickering toward black, as every eye turned to the man they'd tried to keep invisible. The groan deepened, a rolling complaint that traveled through beams and bones alike. He felt it in his teeth as much as his feet. Overhead lights dipped, recovered, dipped again. Engineers spoke fast, words tangling, certainty leaking out of every sentence. No one was fully in charge anymore. He crouched beneath the conduit rack, eyes tracking vibration patterns while the others argued. The service spine ran straight up the tower like a backbone. Nobody bothered. To protect. It wasn't designed for comfort or presentation, just function. That was why it still worked. He pressed his ear to the metal and listened, counting oscillations the way others counted breaths. Power surged in waves, not spikes. A cascade meant something upstream was choking. He could fix choking. Behind him, the woman paced, heels sharp against steel, phone forgotten in her hand. Her authority had always filled rooms. Here, it shrank. She hated that. An engineer cleared his throat and tried to reassert control, pointing at a tablet full of reassuring lines. We need approvals, he insisted, voice tight. We need air, came the calm reply. The difference hung between them. He reached up and traced the conduit path with his finger, mapping loads, imagining reroutes. There was a manual bypass 3 levels down, buried behind a locked cage. If he fed power through it, he could isolate the failing branch. If it went wrong, the blackout would be total. He stood, wiping sweat from his brow, and faced the room. "I can reroute through the spine," he said. "You'll lose the presentation, the lights, the illusion." "You won't lose lives." Murmurs spread, fear and calculation mixing in equal measure. Someone asked about liability. Someone else whispered about cameras. He waited them out. Another alarm wailed, closer now, vibrating the cage doors. The building didn't care about approvals. It demanded action. The woman swallowed hard. For the first time, she looked at him like a person instead of a role. "Do it," she said. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the kid and an engineer moving fast toward the stairwell. Security fumbled with keys as they descended, alarms echoing off concrete. Each step down brought heavier heat. They reached the cage. He unlocked it with shaking hands that steadied as soon as the door opened. Inside, the bypass loomed, old and unapologetic. He smiled despite himself. "They don't build them like this anymore," he murmured. No one replied. He set to work, hands sure, mind quiet. Switches fell in sequence, breakers thrown with deliberate timing. The spine took the load with a shudder. Above them, lights died. Then emergency strips flared, steady and sufficient. Air handlers roared back to life on backup flow. Silence followed, broken only by distant cries turning to breaths. He leaned against the cage, chest heaving. They had minutes now. But the tower was dark to the world. Investors would see it. So would everyone else. He straightened, already anticipating the next fight. Keeping people alive was one thing. Keeping the truth from surfacing would be harder. Footsteps thundered above as security and executives rushed toward the outage. Voices overlapped, anger and fear feeding each other. He could already imagine the accusations. The woman's radio crackled nonstop, demands piling up. She answered none of them. Her eyes stayed on him. "This will come back on me," she said, quietly. "It already has," he replied. He wasn't cruel about it. He checked the gauges again, verifying stability. The bypass held. For now. Up in the stairwell, a small voice called for help, thin but stronger. Relief washed through him. That sound mattered more than headlines. He started climbing back up, muscles burning, mind already preparing explanations. The kid followed, eyes wide. "You really know this stuff," the kid said. He gave a non-committal shrug. "I had good teachers," he said. That was all he offered. As they emerged onto the service level, the weight of attention pressed in. Cameras pointed, questions flew. He stopped just short of the lights, choosing the shadow instead. Power never looked there, but tonight it would have to. He took a breath, feeling the building steady beneath his feet. The next decision wouldn't be about machines, it would be about blame. He stepped forward anyway, for the people upstairs, for the child breathing easier, and for the truth that was about to surface whether they liked it or not. The building stood silent, waiting for its story to be told. He knew it wouldn't be kind, but it would be honest. Somewhere above, emergency lights reflected off glass and faces alike. The tower had gone dark. Now it was watching. So were they. And nothing would stay hidden after this. Not the failure, not the courage, not the man they underestimated, especially not him, ever again. Emergency lights cast everything in harsh angles as he stepped into the upper service corridor, the glow flattening faces and stripping away polish. The tower felt different now, quieter, alert, like an animal that had stopped thrashing and started watching. Every step echoed too loudly. Every breath felt borrowed. People clustered near the stairwell doors, executives and assistants mixed together, hierarchy blurred by fear. Someone whispered his job title like it explained everything. Someone else pointed at the darkened glass walls and shook their head in disbelief. Miranda stood near the center of it all, posture rigid, jaw set. When she saw him, something in her expression tightened. Not anger, not relief, but calculation. The kind that came when control slipped and someone needed a new narrative. "What happened?" she asked, voice steady enough to fool an audience. He didn't rush to answer. He checked his watch first, reflexive. Time mattered. "We isolated the failing branch and rerouted through the service spine," he said. "Airflow's stable on backup, powers holding." An engineer scoffed softly. "You shut down half the tower." "I shut down what was killing it," he replied. A murmur rolled through the group. Phones were up now, lenses pointed, hungry. He could feel the moment stretching, reality pressing against reputation. Miranda took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You went far beyond your authority." He met her gaze, calm. Authority didn't stop the alarms. Her nostrils flared. She turned to the crowd instead. "We're assessing next steps. There was a facilities overreach." Facilities. Again. Before he could respond, a medic hurried past, pushing toward the stairwell with oxygen gear. The sight cut through the noise like a blade. He watched until the doors closed, then looked back at Miranda. "They're alive," he said quietly. "Because we moved." The engineer from earlier shifted uncomfortably. "He's not wrong. The system logs—" Miranda silenced him with a look. "We'll review logs later." The lights flickered as if in agreement, then steadied. Backup systems hummed, imperfect but dependable. He felt the building settle, grateful in its own way. A security guard approached, hesitant. "Sir, ma'am, media's asking who authorized the shutdown." Miranda's eyes flicked to him again. For a heartbeat, he thought she might say his name. Instead, she said, "I did." Surprise rippled. He blinked once, then understood. She was claiming the decision to contain fallout, to own the narrative before it owned her. He didn't correct her. Not yet. They moved into a makeshift command area, emergency tables dragged together, screens flickering with partial data. He stood at the edge, listening, offering input only when it mattered. Every suggestion landed clean, efficient. Engineers stopped arguing and started following. Minutes passed, then more. Stability held. A junior exec leaned over and whispered to Miranda, face pale. "Investors are asking how a single-point failure took out the tower." Her shoulders stiffened. "It didn't," she said. "A human error did." The words hung there, unfinished. He stepped forward, voice carrying without effort. It wasn't a single point, it was a pattern. Warnings ignored, systems designed to hide strain instead of relieve it. Eyes turned, cameras tilted. Miranda opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since this began, she hesitated. He continued, not loud, not angry. "If you want the lights back on without risking another failure, you'll need to keep the spine isolated for another hour." An engineer nodded slowly. "He's right." The crowd murmured again, louder now. Respect, confusion, resentment, all mixing. If you're still here watching this unfold, subscribe now, because what comes next isn't just about saving a building, it's about exposing the truth behind power. Miranda inhaled, sharp. "Fine," she said. 1 hour. The decision echoed through radios, through systems, through people who'd never imagined listening to him. He felt no triumph, only focus. As the room dispersed into controlled motion, Miranda lingered. "You put me in an impossible position," she said quietly. "You put the building in one first," he replied. She studied him, eyes narrowing. Who are you, really? He glanced toward the stairwell, toward the floor where a child was breathing again. Someone who fixes things, he said. A notification pinged on a nearby screen. External power crews were en route. Media requests stacked up. The story was already leaking. Miranda straightened, mask sliding back into place. This conversation isn't over. He nodded. It never is. She walked away, heels sharp again, but the sound lacked its earlier certainty. Around him, people worked with new caution, new respect. The building held steady, humming its grudging approval. He leaned against the wall for a moment, fatigue washing through him now that the edge had dulled. He checked his watch again. Late, but not too late. The crisis wasn't finished. It had just shifted. Machines were only half the battle. The other half wore a blazer and controlled the story. The hour crawled forward on the backs of blinking indicators and hushed conversations. Backup power held, but it was a tense kind of holding, like muscles clenched too long. He stayed near the wall, half in shadow, eyes moving constantly, gauges, faces, exits. Crisis changed people. It stripped them down. Engineers rotated in and out, some confident, some rattled. Each time one suggested restoring full power early, he shook his head and explained why, calmly, patiently, never raising his voice. And each time, logic won. That alone unsettled them more than the alarms had. On a nearby monitor, a live feed showed the restricted floor. Medics knelt beside a small figure wrapped in a silver thermal blanket. The child's chest rose and fell, steadier now. An oxygen mask fogged with each breath. He felt his own lungs loosen in response. Miranda stood at the far end of the command table, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and controlled. "We are not discussing fault until systems are fully restored," she said. "No, I don't care what they're speculating." She glanced toward him as she spoke, then turned away, lowering her voice even further. He knew that look. It wasn't gratitude, it was threat assessment. The lights flickered once more, brief, contained, but enough to snap every head up. He stepped forward instantly, checking readouts. "That's residual load shedding," he said, expected. An engineer exhaled shakily. "You sure?" "Yes." The certainty wasn't arrogance. It was earned. Minutes later, external power crews checked in via video link. Faces appeared on screens, hard hats, and night glare behind them. They asked questions. He answered most of them before Miranda could, not because he wanted to, but because speed mattered. "Why was the spine overloaded in the first place?" one crew lead asked. "Because executive systems were prioritized over safety buffers," he said. Everything was tuned for appearance, not resilience. Silence followed. Miranda's jaw tightened. "That's an internal design choice," she said sharply. "It's a physics problem," he replied. "Design doesn't care who signed off." The crew lead nodded slowly. "We're seeing the same thing on our end." Respect shifted, subtle but unmistakable. The room felt it. So did Miranda. As systems stabilized further, people began to whisper, not about the outage, but about him. Where he learned to talk like that, how he knew those schematics without pulling them up, why he stayed so calm. He ignored it, focus narrowing again as one last warning light pulsed amber instead of green. He moved closer, adjusting a parameter with 2 quick taps. The pulse faded. "There," he said. "Now we wait." Waiting was the hardest part. With nothing immediate to fix, exhaustion crept in. His hands trembled slightly when he finally let them rest at his sides. He rolled his shoulders, easing tension he'd been carrying for years. Miranda ended her call and approached, stopping just outside his personal space. "You made me look unprepared," she said quietly. You were, he answered, just as quietly. Her eyes flashed. Careful. He met her gaze without flinching. I am. For a long moment neither spoke. Around them, the tower breathed easier, systems humming in a steadier rhythm. You could have ruined me, she said finally. I could have walked away, he replied. I didn't. That unsettled her more than blame ever could. A notification chimed. Full power restoration approved, phased, controlled, safe. He supervised the sequence, calling out steps, correcting minor errors before they became major ones. Lights returned floor by floor. A slow sunrise through glass and steel. Applause broke out when the main grid came back online. Not loud, not celebratory, relieved. Cameras caught it. So did headlines in the making. As the crowd thinned, Miranda lingered again, watching him pack away tools. You never answered my question, she said. Who are you really? He clipped the last tool onto his belt and looked toward the stairwell. A dad, he said, who doesn't get second chances when systems fail. She studied him, something like doubt cracking her certainty. You're wasted down here. He shrugged. Depends what you value. Sirens faded outside. The crisis, at least the visible one, was over. What remained was quieter, sharper. He checked his watch once more. Very late now. But tonight, late meant alive. He turned toward the exit, ready to leave the command space behind, knowing full well that the story was only beginning. Power had been restored to the tower, but something else had shifted too, and Miranda Vale felt it. He was halfway down the service stairwell when a voice echoed after him, sharp against concrete. Wait. He stopped, hand resting on the rail, and turned slowly. Miranda stood 2 landings up, framed by emergency lighting that hadn't yet been switched off. Without the glow of presentation screens and polished glass, she looked smaller, still controlled, still dangerous. The power's stable, she said. You can go. He nodded. I know. Then why are you still here? The question came out harsher than she intended. He glanced upward, toward the floors that were lighting back to life one by one. Because stability isn't the same as safe, he said. Not yet. She descended a few steps, heels clicking, sound returning to a place that had been ruled by boots and alarms. Engineering says the risk window has passed. Engineering didn't hear the building cough, he replied. It hasn't finished telling the truth. That earned a pause. She studied him again, like she was recalibrating an equation that no longer balanced. You're assuming I'll let you keep interfering, she said. He met her gaze evenly. You already did. Footsteps approached from below. Security, executives, a couple of board members drawn by curiosity and damage control. Conversations hushed when they saw him standing there, still in uniform, still central to something they didn't fully understand. Miranda straightened. We'll take this upstairs, she said, voice returning to its practiced cadence. He shook his head once. Upstairs is where this started. A murmur rippled through the group. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Someone else glanced at a phone, then back at him. The service spine needs a full inspection, he continued, addressing no one and everyone. Not tomorrow, now, before load creep builds again. One of the board members frowned. That area isn't designed for... It's designed to work, he said calmly. Unlike half the systems you prioritized. Silence followed, heavier this time. The accusation landed where it couldn't be deflected easily. Miranda felt the eyes on her, felt the narrative threatening to slip. You're out of line, she said. He didn't raise his voice. I'm on time. A beat passed, then another. Finally, an older board member cleared his throat. "If there's still risk," he said, carefully, "we should hear him out." Miranda's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Authority was already being renegotiated around her. They moved back into the corridor. No stage lights, no grand tables, just concrete walls and exposed pipes. The place Power never looked. Until now. He walked them through it, pointing out stress points, explaining the pattern of failures with simple clarity, not jargon, not blame, cause and effect. Every sentence chipped away at the illusion that this was a freak incident. One executive scoffed. "You expect us to believe this has been building for years?" "Yes," he said, "because I reported it. Others did too." "That's a serious claim." "It's a documented one." He gestured to the panel logs, maintenance reports stacked digitally and physically, ignored because they didn't come from the right desks. Screens were pulled up. Names scrolled, dates, patterns. Recognition dawned slowly, uncomfortably. Miranda felt it then. The shift she couldn't stop. This wasn't a rogue employee anymore. This was exposure. "Enough," she snapped. "This review will happen internally." He looked at her, really looked this time. It already isn't. Cameras hovered at the far end of the hall. Reporters kept at bay but close enough to smell blood. The board members exchanged glances. Damage control calculations played out in real time. "You saved the tower," one of them said at last. Publicly. He shook his head. "I saved people. The tower saved itself once you stopped fighting it." That answer unsettled them more than bravado ever could. A message pinged across multiple phones at once. A preliminary incident brief leaked, headlines forming. Not flattering ones. Miranda closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "What do you want?" He didn't answer right away. He thought of a small apartment, a child asleep with easier breaths tonight, of systems that failed because no one listened. "I want the reports read," he said. "I want safety to outrank optics, and I want the people who keep this place alive to be heard before it breaks again." That wasn't a demand that could be spun. It was too reasonable, too public. The board member nodded slowly. "We'll convene." Miranda said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than protest. As the group dispersed, she lingered once more. "You've made enemies," she said. He shrugged. "I made time." She studied him, something like reluctant respect flickering beneath the tension. "This isn't over." "No," he agreed, "but it started." He turned away, descending the stairs at last, leaving behind a corridor that would never feel quite the same. Above him, the tower glowed again, stable but changed, and somewhere deep in its spine, the truth kept humming. Impossible to ignore now that it had been heard. He reached the ground level as the building settled into a new rhythm. Emergency lights finally dimming to their standby glow. The lobby looked bruised, scuffed marble, abandoned cables, clusters of people speaking in lowered voices like a church after a storm. Power had returned, but confidence hadn't. He headed for the service corridor again, instinct pulling him back to the places that made sense. Behind the scenes, orders still mattered. He knelt beside a panel near the loading dock and checked a thermal strip he'd taped earlier. Still warm. Not dangerous. Yet. A familiar voice cleared its throat behind him. "You don't quit, do you?" He stood and turned. The older board member from upstairs watched him with a careful expression, curiosity replacing skepticism. "Machines don't care if you're tired," he said. "They only care if you're honest." The man nodded slowly. "You embarrassed some powerful people tonight." Power embarrassed itself, he replied. I just turned on the lights. The board member glanced around, then leaned in. They're calling an emergency review, external, independent. That got his attention. Good. You won't be invited, the man added. Not officially. He smiled faintly. I wasn't invited to fix the building either. The board member chuckled despite himself. I thought you should know. As the man walked away, footsteps echoed from the opposite end. Miranda Vale approached, posture composed, but edges frayed. The confident stride was there, but it carried weight now. You've made this impossible to contain, she said. He wiped his hands on his uniform. Containment was the problem. Her eyes flicked to the panel, then back to him. You understand what happens next. Investigations, lawyers, scapegoats. Yes. And you're fine being one of them? He considered that. I'm fine being honest. She studied him, then surprised him by asking, What would you change first? He didn't answer immediately. He looked around at the dock, the worn tools, the routes no one mapped for executives. I'd give authority to the people closest to failure, he said, not the ones farthest from consequences. She exhaled slowly. You're dangerous, he shrugged. Only to broken systems. A notification buzzed on her phone. She glanced at it, jaw tightening. Media's spinning this as a miracle save. There are no miracle, he said. Just neglected warnings. Silence stretched. Then she said quietly, You realize they're going to ask who you are. They already have. And when they do? He thought of the worn keychain in his pocket, the past he'd kept folded away like an old map. They'll hear what matters. A security guard interrupted, voice hesitant. Sir, ma'am, the press wants a statement. Miranda straightened, reflexively reclaiming her mask. I'll handle it. He turned back to the panel, fingers already moving. The building didn't need statements. It needed care. As she walked away, she paused. You could have leveraged this, she said, demanded a title, a position. He smiled without looking up. I demanded air. She didn't respond. Minutes later, engineers joined him, not arguing this time, but asking. He guided them through checks, teaching without preaching. Each step tightened the net around the truth. Logs were saved, screenshots archived. Nothing flashy, just preparation. If you want to see how preparation beats power every time, subscribe now, because what's coming next isn't loud, it's unavoidable. By the time dawn hinted at the edges of the glass doors, the tower was stable. Truly stable. He finally allowed himself to sit on a crate, fatigue crashing in waves. His phone buzzed. 1 missed call, 3 messages. He didn't read them yet. He knew what they'd say. He was late, but alive. Miranda returned alone, without cameras. They're convening. Within the hour, she said. External auditors, regulators. Good. They'll want testimony, he nodded. I'll give it. She hesitated, then extended her hand. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. He looked at her hand, then shook it. Firm, brief. So did you, he said, eventually. A flicker of something crossed her face. Relief, maybe, or the beginning of change. He gathered his tools and headed toward the exit. The sky outside paling from black to gray. The night had stripped the tower bare, and in doing so revealed its bones. Tomorrow, the story would harden into facts. And facts, once spoken aloud, had a way of leveling rooms. He pushed open the door, cool air washing over him, already bracing for the next confrontation. The building stood behind him, lit and watching. So did the world. Morning light crept across the plaza, pale and unforgiving, as he crossed back toward the tower. He hadn't gone home. There hadn't been time. Instead, he'd sat in his car with the seat reclined just enough to rest his eyes, phone pressed to his ear, while a small familiar voice complained about breakfast, cereal, and missing socks. Hearing steady breathing on the other end had been enough to pull him back to his feet. Inside, the lobby felt different again, quieter, cleaner, like a place pretending nothing had happened while still smelling faintly of smoke and stress. People glanced at him now, not dismissively, but with curiosity edged by caution. Recognition was spreading, slowly, unevenly. He signed in without comment and headed for the temporary operations room, where auditors were already setting up. Boxes of files lined the walls. Screens glowed with frozen timestamps from the night before. This wasn't a crisis anymore. It was a reckoning. Miranda stood near the head of the room, blazer swapped for a simpler jacket, hair pulled back tight. She looked like someone preparing for impact. When she saw him, she nodded once. "They're starting with systems," she said, "then decisions." He set his tools down carefully. Decisions made the systems fail. A faint smile tugged at her mouth, gone as quickly as it appeared. "You're not wrong." The auditors entered. Neutral faces, practiced calm. Introductions were made, titles exchanged. When it was his turn, there was a pause, an expectant silence that carried weight. "He's facilities," Miranda said. The word landed softer than before. "And last night," an auditor added, eyes on a tablet, "he was acting operations lead." Heads turned, pens stilled. He spoke when prompted, measured and clear. He described patterns, not people. Logs, not rumors. The way warnings stacked quietly until they became emergencies. He didn't dramatize, he didn't soften. Truth didn't need either. Questions followed. Sharp ones. Hypotheticals. Liability traps. He navigated them with the same calm he'd used on the machine, answering. Only what was asked, never speculating, never flinching. Miranda listened, arms crossed, absorbing each answer like a recalculation. Each fact he laid out narrowed her options. She knew it. So did everyone else. At one point, an auditor frowned. "You're describing protocols usually overseen by senior infrastructure engineers." He nodded. "Yes. And you recognize them immediately." "Yes." "Why?" He reached into his pocket and placed the worn keychain on the table. The metal insignia caught the light, dull but unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Silence fell. One auditor leaned closer, eyes widening a fraction. "This is from before," he said simply. "Before I needed predictable hours more than prestige." Miranda's breath hitched, just barely. She hadn't known, or she'd suspected and chosen not to ask. The room shifted. Not explosively, subtly, like weight redistributing across a structure. "So, you were qualified," the auditor said carefully. "I still am," he replied. "I just work where I'm needed." Questions stopped circling him and started circling the tower instead. Policies, incentives, who ignored what and when. The focus moved upward, outward. Outside the glass walls, reporters gathered, cameras poised. A story was forming whether anyone liked it or not. Miranda closed her eyes briefly, then straightened. When she spoke again, her voice carried less steel and more resolve. "We failed to listen," she said. "That's on leadership." The admission rippled through the room. It didn't absolve her, but it changed the tone. The auditors took notes, satisfied enough to continue. The meeting adjourned with promises of follow-ups and formal findings. As people filed out, glances lingered on him, some respectful, some resentful. Miranda remained behind. "You didn't have to reveal that," she said quietly. He shrugged. "They asked the right question." She nodded once. "This will cost me." "It might," he said, "or it might save someone later." She considered that, then extended her hand again. This time, the gesture felt different, less transactional, more human. "Whatever happens," she said, "you changed this place." He shook her hand and picked up his tools. "Good," he replied. "It needed changing." As he left the room, the building hummed steadily, systems balanced, air clean. Outside, the crowd buzzed with anticipation. He walked past them without stopping, heading toward the exit and the day waiting beyond the glass. The truth was out now, and it wasn't going back in. The doors slid shut behind him, muting the low roar of reporters outside, and the tower seemed to exhale again. Morning had fully arrived now, sunlight cutting clean lines across the lobby floor. What had felt like a battleground hours earlier looked almost innocent. He knew better. Buildings remembered stress the way people did. He crossed toward service desk to sign out, routine grounding him while his thoughts raced ahead. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it, finishing the entry with careful handwriting. Then he paused, pen hovering, as a familiar vibration rippled faintly through the floor. Subtle, controlled, but wrong. He straightened, eyes lifting toward the atrium ceiling. The hum had shifted pitch, just enough to register. His jaw tightened. The restoration sequence had been clean, too clean. He turned back toward the interior doors, already moving. An engineer spotted him and frowned. "We're green across the board." "Across which board?" he asked. The man hesitated. "Main distribution." "Check the executive ring," he said. "Now." The engineer tapped his tablet, color draining from his face. "We've got a spike." Miranda appeared at his side almost instantly, expression hardening as she followed the data. "How is that possible?" "Because they rushed," he said. "Because someone wanted the optics fixed before the cause." The spike surged again, sharper this time, alarms chirping as if embarrassed to speak up after everything that had already happened. The atrium lights flickered, drawing gasps from those who hadn't yet left. "We just went through this," Miranda said, anger edging her voice. "No," he replied, "we went around it." He pivoted, scanning the lobby, calculating pathways. The executive ring fed off a redundant loop that had been patched, not rebuilt. Underload. Patched systems failed with prideful predictability. "Lock down the ring," he said. "Now." "That floor's occupied," Miranda snapped. "Then it won't be if this trips," he shot back. Security hesitated, caught between authority and urgency. He didn't wait. He broke into a run toward the service elevator, fingers flying over the controls. The car lurched upward, slower than he liked. Miranda followed, heels abandoned for speed. "If this goes public, again, it will," he said, "whether we stop it or not." The doors opened onto the executive ring, a gleaming corridor of glass and art, still humming with quiet arrogance. He felt the vibration immediately, stronger here, pulsing through the polished floor like a warning heartbeat. "Shut it down," he said, pointing at the nearest panel. "That will black out everything that shouldn't have been prioritized," he finished. Miranda stared at him, then at the panel, then at the offices lining the hall. For a split second, the old instinct flared, the need to protect image at all costs. Then she swiped her badge, power cut cleanly. Lights died, emergency strips flared. The vibration eased, then stilled. He exhaled, shoulders sagging as the system settled into a safer rhythm. He leaned against the wall, eyes closed, counting his own breaths this time. Footsteps echoed as executives spilled into the hall, voices rising in confusion and anger. Cameras followed, capturing the darkened corridor, the CEO standing beside a man in a maintenance uniform, both lit by the same emergency glow. "What's happening?" someone demanded. Miranda turned to face them, spine straight. "We're fixing what we ignored." The words carried. Cameras caught them. Reporters leaned forward. He opened his eyes and looked at the crowd, seeing not enemies but variables, fear, pride, relief, all the same elements that had nearly broken the tower. An executive scoffed. "You shut us down again? On whose authority?" Miranda didn't look away. "Mine." A murmur spread, shock, disbelief. "And on his recommendation," she added, gesturing to him, "because he was right." The admission hit harder than any accusation. Silence followed, thick and undeniable. He stepped forward, voice steady but tired. "This system needs rebuilding," he said. "Not patching, not spin, real work, or we'll be back here again." No one laughed this time. Sirens wailed, faintly outside, a reminder of the night that refused to stay buried. The tower stood dark in one wing, bright in another, a visual ledger of consequence. Miranda met his eyes, something like resolve settling in. "We'll rebuild," she said. He nodded. "Then listen." The cameras kept rolling as the truth unfolded in real time, unfiltered and unavoidable. For the first time since he'd stepped into the lobby the night before, the balance of power felt honest, and the building, finally, was quiet. The quiet didn't last. It never did when truth finally surfaced. Within minutes, the executive ring filled with people who weren't used to standing in emergency light. Board members, regulators, legal counsel, all drawn by the second shutdown and the cameras already broadcasting it live. The polished confidence they'd carried into the building hours earlier had thinned, replaced by tight jaws and sharper questions. Miranda stood at the center again, but this time she didn't control the tempo. The room did, and the room wanted answers. An auditor stepped forward, tablet glowing. "This is the second failure in less than 12 hours, she said. Both times corrective action came from the same individual. All eyes shifted to him. He felt the weight of it settle across his shoulders, not heavy, not crushing. Familiar, like gear he'd worn before. "Why," the auditor continued, "was someone with your level of expertise assigned to maintenance?" The question cut clean. No accusation, no sympathy, just fact. Miranda inhaled sharply, already knowing where this was going. She didn't interrupt. He answered evenly, "Because maintenance kept me close to systems that mattered, and because I needed a schedule that let me get home every night." A murmur rippled through the group. The auditor scrolled, then looked up again. "Your record indicates senior infrastructure command experience, large-scale systems, crisis environments." "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. "And none of that was disclosed internally?" He shook his head. "I disclosed what was required." Miranda closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had shifted. Less defensiveness, more reckoning. "That omission," a board member said slowly, "cost us trust, and ignoring his warnings nearly cost lives." The words landed with finality. Miranda straightened, shoulders back, voice clear. "The fault is leadership's, mine included. We rewarded silence and punished inconvenience." Cameras caught it. The admission was already spreading beyond the walls. No one spoke for a moment. Then the auditor nodded. "We'll recommend immediate structural reforms, safety oversight independent of executive influence." Relief moved through the room, not comfort, but release. He exhaled quietly. This was the moment he'd been moving toward since the first alarm. Not revenge, correction. Miranda turned to him, expression stripped of performance. "You could have stayed invisible," she said. "Why didn't you?" He thought of the child upstairs, of late buses, of the way the building had begged to be heard. "Because invisible systems fail first," he said. That answer stayed with her. As people dispersed, reporters pressed closer, voices overlapping. Questions flew, about credentials, about failures, about accountability. He didn't stop for them. He didn't need to. The story was already bigger than him. Miranda walked beside him toward the service exit, their footsteps in sync for the first time. "They're restructuring," she said, "effective immediately." He nodded. "And they want you involved." He stopped at the door and turned to her. "Involved how?" "As an authority," she said, "not a workaround." He considered that carefully. Power, once offered, had a cost. "I'll advise," he said, "but I won't disappear into meetings." She smiled faintly. "I figured." They stood there for a moment, not as adversaries, not quite allies. Two people standing at the edge of a system that had been forced to grow up overnight. Outside, daylight fully claimed the city. Sirens had faded. The tower loomed behind them, altered in ways no renovation could hide. He stepped out into the air, lungs filling easily. The building would survive. So would the truth. And this time, it wouldn't be ignored. He stood across the street from the tower as the city fully woke, traffic thickening, people moving with the unthinking confidence that comes from believing systems will hold. The glass facade caught the morning sun, flawless from the outside. If you didn't know better, you'd think nothing had happened at all. He knew better. His phone buzzed again. This time, he answered. A small voice filled his ear, impatient and relieved all at once, complaining about toast and asking why he wasn't home yet. He smiled, despite the weight still sitting in his chest. "I'm on my way," he said. "Promise." When he ended the call, Miranda Vale stepped up beside him. No cameras now, no entourage. Just two people looking at the same building for very different reasons. "They've suspended 3 executives pending review," she said, "including people who outranked me." He nodded slowly. "Consequences. Real ones." "The board accepted the auditor's recommendations," she continued. "Independent safety oversight. Mandatory response timelines. No more bearing reports because they're inconvenient." "That'll help," he said. "If it's enforced." She glanced at him. "It will be. They made me responsible for that." He studied her face, searching for the old certainty, the polished armor. It was still there, but cracked, changed. "Then don't waste it," he said. She exhaled, a sound somewhere between resolve and exhaustion. "I won't." They stood in silence for a moment longer, the hum of the city filling the space between them. Finally, she spoke again. "They offered you a formal role, director level, full authority." He didn't look surprised. "I know." "And?" He shifted his weight, eyes never leaving the tower. "I said no." Her head turned sharply. "You what?" "I said I'd consult," he clarified. "Advise, train, be heard, but I won't sit behind glass all day." She frowned. "You'd have power." "I already had enough to keep people alive," he replied. "More than that starts costing time I can't spend." Understanding dawned slowly. "Your kid?" "Yes." She nodded, once, sharp. "They're lucky you're not ambitious." He smiled faintly. "I am, just not for the things you were." A breeze moved through the street, carrying the smell of coffee and exhaust and normal life. The crisis already felt like it belonged to another day, another version of the city. Miranda straightened, slipping back into her role, but not the old one. "For what it's worth," she said, "you forced me to be better." He met her eyes. "Good." They parted without ceremony. She headed back toward the tower. He walked toward his car, tools rattling softly with each step. For the first time in years, the weight of them felt lighter. As he drove away, the building receded in the mirror, still standing, still powerful, but no longer untouchable. Inside it, reports would be read. Warnings would be logged. People would listen earlier than they used to. It wasn't justice in a headline sense. It was something quieter, more lasting. At a red light, he checked the time and smiled. Late, but home was close now. Tonight, he'd sit at the kitchen table, help with homework, listen to stories about school. He'd count breaths again, not because he was afraid, but because some habits never left you. The light turned green. Behind him, the tower hummed, systems balanced, spine reinforced, truth woven into its bones, whether anyone liked it or not. Ahead of him waited a small apartment, a warm meal, and a child who didn't care about titles or towers, only that he showed up. That had always been the real victory. Before we end this story, ask me for the next story title you want to hear. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. A single dad let a stranger borrow his phone. Unaware. She was a billionaire watching him closely. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?